Today we're taking a look at more historical evidence for the reliability of the Gospels, specifically in John 2:6 today. We're going to see that John puts in some seemingly accidental details, which are details that aren't very important to the story. And so we'll take a look at the historical criteria of an eyewitness account, specifically those accidental details. And again, accidental does not mean they were put in by accident, but it does mean that they are not essential to the story. So with that, let's take a look at the original Greek, and then let's talk about those accidental details. And so John 2:6 says this, Ason, there were de and there were, there, hydriae, there were water pots, lithene of stone, hex being 6, you might recognize that from the English hex, like hexagon, 6, kaimene, sets, kata after or according to ton the katharismon, the manner of purifying or the manner of watering yourself, ton of Judeon of the Jews, korusai, which contain ana, each one, metretas, a firkin is what the King James says, but a measurement, dua, 2, so 2 firkins, a or tres, 3. Now this whole measurement thing and the fact that this is according to the purification ritual of the Jews are completely accidental to the story. So the story here is the wedding at Cana. Jesus goes, they run out of wine, and so he tells some of the servants to grab some water pots because he's going to turn the water into wine. Now what those water pots were makes no difference on the story. There may be some niche theological understanding that a pastor brings out of it, and I believe that that could have been intended by God, but these are basically just accidental details. It doesn't necessarily matter that these are purification pots. It doesn't necessarily matter that these are pots that contain 2 or 3 measurements of water. However, it does matter on the basis of historical reliability. If I started telling you a story about 2 men in a country far, far away who are walking along a beach, well, that's all the details you would need for me to set up my story. They're on a beach. That's the location. Who is it? It's these 2 men, okay? But if I started telling you they're walking along the beach that has crabs, and in that area you don't have any crabs, well, that's a pretty good indicator that I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm making up a story about somewhere that I'm not familiar with because I was not actually there, or the person I'm getting the story from was not actually there. In this case, John seems to be one of the disciples of Jesus, so he would have been physically there or around Jesus when Jesus would tell the story, so he would then, by extension, be hearing the story from Jesus himself. Now with that, if I told you that there were crabs on the beach and there were no crabs, then you would know that I'm just making it up and I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not familiar with the place. But if I say there's 2 men on a beach, and that's the beach that has crabs, and there was a beach with crabs, and it was a specific beach, then that would probably tip you off that I'm talking about a specific beach because I'm familiar with the area. If not from my own eyes, then at least from the person that I'm getting the story from. And that's what's happening here with John. See, John, or the person who's supplying the story to the Gospel of John, is familiar with the purification ritual of the Jews near the area of Israel. See, if this was being written from Rome, and they weren't very familiar with the Jewish practices, then they could very easily blunder at this point, or just not put anything in at all. Why does it matter that these stone water jars are 2 or 3 measurements of water? Well, it doesn't matter necessarily to the story, but John could be doing what I just did with my story. You know, the beach that has the crabs. And now I say that because I'm familiar, and I assume my audience is somewhat familiar with that beach. And I believe John here is doing the same thing. He's saying the water jugs, you know, the ones used for the purification rituals of the Jews, you know, the ones that carry 2 or 3 measurements of water. Yeah, it's those ones that he's doing, the big ones used for purification. That's what I believe is happening here. It's a parenthetical note because John is familiar, or the author of John, whoever it may be. It is technically anonymous, although throughout history it's only been identified with the Apostle John, to my knowledge at least. If I'm wrong on that, please comment down below. I'd love to know. But whether it's John or another disciple or someone in the Christian community compiling these stories about Jesus, it seems pretty clear. Whoever gave this story was familiar with the Jewish customs of the day, of the time of Jesus, and seem to be either physically there or hear it from someone who was physically there. Super interesting, and another point for the reliability where the author of John could have stumbled on this Jewish practice, but instead hit it right on the nose. Thanks for joining us at Bible Student Languages, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. If you enjoyed the video today, here are some more that YouTube thinks you'll enjoy.